Hi. Good evening. How's everybody? What a beautiful room. Hey, thanks so much for coming. This is our opportunity to celebrate a brand new publication, hashtag identity, hashtagging race, gender, sexuality, and nation. Yay. This is a project long in the making, a collaborative project that Gail and I have worked on with so many of you in the room, so it's really exciting to have it in the world and to celebrate it being in the world together in a place that feels like it celebrates old media. It feels kind of nice to celebrate new media of this nature.
Okay, so I just wanted to say that The Color of New Media was founded 6 years ago. Oh my gosh. Paige Johnson was a graduate student here in performance studies, and she and I had these conversations about whether the color of new media studies was white, because there's so many great white men, so-called great white men, that are at the core of new media studies. So we started this working group in the hopes to attract a really diverse and wildly eclectic and heterogeneous and non-traditional group of new media scholars, and to produce work that was all those things too, that was going to be way out on the fringe, way out on the edges of what we perceive new media studies to be doing at the time. And I think this book really realized all of our goals. This is a word cloud that we generated from all of the articles, all of the chapters in the book. So these are all of the hashtags that we talk about, that our authors talk about in this book. And we managed to get published open access. So that's one reason why we don't have any books for sale, even though some people have been saying they would love a hard copy. Go ahead, please order a hard copy. But you can also just go to the University of Michigan Press website and download the whole book for $0. So please do that. Thank you for coming. I think Keith is gonna call upon the authors to contribute in their turn, and of course our excellent librarian who made the open access edition happen. So you'll hear from a lot of us tonight. So Keith, thank you for.
Hi, so I'll do a little bit of emceeing. We've got several contributors, including some who are Skyping in all the way from Colorado, who we'll get to in just a minute. But I wanted to start with Rachael Sandburg from the library. So please come on.
So thanks for the introduction. Thanks for having me. As was pointed out, you can go to the University of Michigan Press's website and read the entire book online for free. So in order to bring this crucial scholarship to the world, I mean, not everyone can afford, I think they're selling the print copies for $80, and not everyone can afford $80 for a print copy, but if you have internet access, you can check it out for free. And not only that, but it's also licensed with a Creative Commons license, which means that other readers can work with and critique it, and excerpt from it to build upon it without worrying that they are infringing copyright, which allows for the scholarly conversation to continue unhindered. You can do all of this because it's published open access. That actually means making sure that the scholarship is available for anyone to read online for free, but also that there are certain reuse rights associated with it. The UC Berkeley community, just to put kind of this scholarship in context, the UC Berkeley community creates a vast array of knowledge and educational content, including literally thousands of scientific journal articles, books, data sets, and other scholarly projects and resources every single year. UC Berkeley authors, like those throughout the University of California campuses, take to heart the university's public research mission and aim to make these materials broadly available, not just to researchers and students here, but to anyone in the world. The push for improved access to all of this knowledge is what led to the passage of the UC's open access policies, but those policies cover journal articles and not books. And it's not surprising that they do. The journal article is sort of the core, the foundation of scientific knowledge and scientific progress for many disciplines, but not necessarily in the humanities and social sciences. And it's also not surprising that because there's so much focus on the journal article, that there are a lot of ways you can make journal articles open access. For example, the University of California has eScholarship, which is an institutional repository, and through the open access policies, journal articles, anyone who writes, who is a UC author, faculty, staff, student, anyone who writes an article can deposit a postprint, which is peer-reviewed, postprint copy in eScholarship. You might have heard we've also started signing things called transformative open access agreements, which are essentially repurposing our subscription spends to instead pay for articles to be published open access. So we're using library money rather than spending that money on getting people access to read things, we're paying for authors to publish. And then the reading is free to the world. There are a lot of these different kind of schemes, shall we say, to make journal articles open, but we're in a new landscape when it comes to sharing the same kind of scholarship with books. For some disciplines, the book is essential in order to not just share content with the world, but promotion and tenure, and the book is really a core piece of that. But we want to be able to make the same strides with readership of books and access to readership that we're making with journal articles. Another thing I want to kind of point out underpinning the importance of making books available to a wider audience is that the audience for these is not just other faculty. Monographs form a key component of what gets assigned for student reading in university classrooms. For students, open access books are a breath of fresh air, especially considering the prices of college textbooks today. Some assigned books and course readers are well upwards of $200 a piece, and textbook prices have risen 88% in the past decade. Open access books are not only free of cost, but also openly licensed so that instructors can continually update them and remix them in order to fit exactly what they need for their courses. So we have an imperative, working to open up long-form scholarship for books in the same way that we've done it for journal articles. Currently, there are only about 19,000 open books, even though, or open monographs, even though 86,000 monographs get published internationally every single year. So part of the disconnect is figuring out how publishers are going to recoup their investment in publishing if they're no longer selling print copies. It costs publishers anywhere between $25,000 and $40,000 per book to publish a book, they claim. So if they're not selling the 300 print copies, because a monograph like the one that we're talking about tonight sells around 250 to 300 copies total. And so if a publisher is not selling those 300 copies, how are they going to recover the $30,000 investment that they made? Well, it turns out that we can apply some of the same kinds of models to incentivizing the creation of open access books that we're doing for journal articles. So what we did with hashtag identity is we gave the University of Michigan $7,500 towards their publishing costs in order to subsidize the production of the book. So it's the same, it has nothing to do with peer review or any of the editorial processes. It's merely to make sure that the outcome can be open to offset some of the costs that they are losing by selling the print copy. And guess what? The publishers are finding that when you make the online copy available, it drives up print-on-demand sales anyway. So even though the idea to publish #identity as an open access book came midway through the publication process, the chapter authors thought that opening the book for free access and download was a really positive move. And Keith mentioned that most of the contributors were graduate students and postdocs, and this gives them an opportunity to share their work quickly and effectively and start building their scholarly reputation. So if you are considering publishing an open access book or journal article, we can support you, and we want to make this happen. We want to serve the university's research mission and share this with the world. So please come talk to us. We're here to support you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And I should say on behalf of Gail and I, our interactions with you and the folks at the library were incredible. It was so inviting and generous and exciting, and you just made it happen. And it worked out so wonderfully. So thank you so much for all the support. So now let me see if I can get Jose and Arturo on. Hello. Hi. Can you hear me okay?
I like
Yes,
this.
yes.
Okay, so we're live. There are probably 40 amazing people here in the room. 25 amazing people here in Morrison Library. And we're inviting you to talk a little bit about your chapter.
Wonderful. Well, not pressure being the first people. I think we want to start by saying that this was a very joyful and while rigorous experience for us, and it was I think we said this to Gail at one point. It was a labor of love between Arturo and I, who are both partners in love and partners in scholarship. Opportunity that we've had to work together and write together. Forgetting that. So, this chapter really was about us coming together and exploring various passions and ideas around learning, but also around queerness and queer culture. And so this chapter documents and talks about one of our favorite local drag queens, well, local in the Bay Area, because now we're in Colorado, Persia, who is also a fourth grade teacher, but also a very well-known drag queen who became viral in 2013 when she, along with her collaborators, Daddy's Plastic, created the video Google Apps. And so our chapter is about pedagogy, and it is about learning, but specifically thinking about how queerness can serve as a pedagogical tool that travels across digital and in-person terrains. And we look at how Persia uses Twitter as one of those vehicles for transmitting this queerness across not only her fans on Twitter, but also the young people that she works with in the school context. So that is the kind of the purpose of the chapter. But I think we also want to talk about how this has animated our work further. That while we have written this chapter and it's been published in this wonderful book, that we have continued to work on this idea of public pedagogy and Twitter. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how he has done that with his students.
Hi, buenas noches, California! One of the things that's been really powerful here at CU Boulder is that I've gotten the opportunity to test out some
some of the principles and design principles and the forms of public pedagogy that Bercia has taught me as a researcher, but also as a pedagogue, and what it means to engage the public. So here at Lyndsey Ogle, I'm teaching a class to freshmen, and they have an interest in becoming teachers, and all of the assignments in my class are submitted on Twitter. And I invite you all to be part of our ecology that we've created. Hashtag Boulder Justice 802. That the 802 is the section number. Again, it's Boulder Justice 802. And one way that we're thinking about the class in particular is that it is a semester-long rumination on the concept of justice. And I'm asking the students to bring together course theories and the everyday dilemmas that they face either in sidewalks, the gym, cafeteria, in their dorm room, and bring these into tension and examine how might I engage in these to really resolve these everyday forms of injustice that they're encountering. And I think Bercia provided us with the framework to do that. And so one thing that we want to really think through here is that Bercia's work is absolutely powerful in its own right, and we were able to actually trace some forms of public pedagogy here, but we would be remiss in really just writing the chapter on its own and describing the work that she did, because I think that she's asking us to put these tools into practice, to animate our everyday lives. And this is one way that we've found that I think is really powerful. I wanted to think through one aspect of Bercia's work and really drive home her message and how we're thinking about it in terms of our work as pedagogues, as educationalists. And so I'll end here by saying, embedded in Bercia's expansive move, we see how the pedagogical intersects with digital media, with very important applications for consequential learning, learning that has weight, that matters. We believe that digital tools can help us look at the past, yes. However, we are compelled to examine, perhaps because of the applied nature of education research, how our own work and view of the past can be used towards transformative ends in the future. We believe digital tools can be leveraged to interrogate power in order to dismantle systems of oppression, as we have seen Bercia and her network begin to engage in such practices that we talked about in this chapter. This can be especially generative for the teachers, the cultural workers, and the mediators who desire, hunger, and yearn for equity. So I invite you all to join in on the discussion that we've started at Boulder, and to find us on Twitter, especially to find our little young pup. He also takes political positions. Merch. So find us. We miss you all.
We miss you!
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was wonderful. It's so great to see you all. Okay, I'm going to turn it over next to Renée Pastel, who is a current doctoral student here at UC Berkeley.
I want to thank Gail and Keith for organizing Color of New Media and this collection, which was an amazing thing to be a part of. I'm Renée Pastel. I am a PhD candidate in film and media with a designated emphasis in new media. And this is my last year as a grad student. My contribution to hashtag identity was hashtag television, on-screen branding, second-screen viewing, and emerging modes of television audience interaction. This traces the use of official hashtags on television in terms of their socio-political potential for audiences, taking RuPaul's Drag Race and Jane the Virgin as two very unique case studies. My chapter considers the community building around official hashtags as opposed to fan-generated hashtags, which offer a lot more flexibility, by looking at the use by fans for identity formation, marking of time for cultural memory for time-shifted viewing, and the raising of social consciousness. So, for example, Jane the Virgin uses hashtags typed on the screen as commentary on what's happening by the wisecracking narrator to punctuate and to politicize viewers. So in a first season episode, the beloved Villanueva matriarch, Alba, is in a coma, and she's being threatened with medical repatriation. And when her daughter indignantly says that can't possibly be legal, then typed across the screen appears in all caps from the narrator, "Yes, this really happens. Look it up. Hashtag immigration reform." And this hashtag is not one that is specific to Jane the Virgin. It's tapping into a broader national conversation. It's asking viewers to engage, and if they use that hashtag, it's one that will reach a broader audience, bringing audience into the show, and also bringing audience of the show into a political discussion. And this call to action, as well as a later call to vote, came in 2015, clearly trying to tap into a cultural zeitgeist and trying to stir up viewers, crossing the boundaries of the show and the fictional world and connecting it, importantly, to our own. And this work on second screen viewing has actually influenced the course of my future research as I'm starting to think about potential next topics and research, in which I plan to continue investigating narrowcasting on television, community building, and streaming television within the context of circulation of images, globalization, and transnational audiences, and transmedia storytelling. So this has been such a pleasure to get to work with two television shows that I deeply love, especially as I'm working on my dissertation, which is looking at war on terror media. It made a nice balance, but also helped to kind of put me in conversation with amazing scholars and to shape my future research.
Thank you so much, Renee. Up next is the wonderful Julia Havard, who can come join us, another PhD candidate here at UC Berkeley.
Cool. Hi, I'm so honored to be writing along all these incredible scholars. My name is Julia Havard, and I'm a PhD candidate at Berkeley in Performance Studies, and I write about queer sexual culture and performance. My chapter is about the hashtag Why I Stayed, developed by African-American writer and activist Beverly Gooden in 2014 in response to the mainstream media's demonization of Renée Rice, who was the then fiance of Ray Rice of the Baltimore Ravens, and who stayed in a relationship with him after a highly publicized assault. I argue that this hashtag, emerging from the historical lineage of Black women's testimony-based anti-violence activism, changed media representation of survivors and shifted blame from survivors to perpetrators, creating a virtual survivor-centered space where a vast diversity of experience with partner violence could coexist, moving away from the need for a singular model of, quote, respectable survivor stories. The hashtag wages a vigorous critique of the systems currently responsible for responding to sexual violence, such as the criminal justice system, manifesting the ways that these systems themselves perpetuate cycles of violence. Lastly, the hashtag presents the action of staying as a space of potential transformation, lifting up moments where staying becomes leaving, and where survivors are able to dream different futures. I write about survivor magic as the collection of resources that survivors develop from and within the experience of trauma that allows for alternate approaches to justice beyond the carceral. So I'm so grateful to have the incredible opportunity to participate in this process under the mentorship of Gail and Keith. This is my first publication, and I learned so much. And I learned much about creating and sustaining intellectual community over time through process from Keith and Gail, and the other authors. So thank you all.
Okay, up next is UC Berkeley undergrad alum and UC Irvine sociology PhD student, Nalia Rodriguez, who's joining us from SoCal.
Hi, my name is Nalia. I'm a third-year PhD student at UC Irvine in sociology. The way I came onto this project, I was taking a class with Dr. Naila Nasir, and Dr. Amina Norris was one of the TAs that was offering an internship that we had to do within the class. So I got to work with her on a project where she was at the time working at the representation project, and the project I was working on was about the portrayal of young black men and boys on Twitter, specifically victims of police brutality. So how was police brutality in relation to black men and boys being talked about on Twitter? And I was doing this project with a classmate, and we then came on with Dr. Norris and got to work on this project. She brought me later on. And so our project was looking at hashtag Sandra Bland, the transmedia story of police brutality about her death, right? And so this project stems from a report that was created by the African American Policy Forum in May 2015 that was trying to raise awareness about the victims of police brutality or police violence in general that weren't being talked about at the time, which were black women and girls. And so using this blueprint of the hashtag Say Her Name to kind of raise awareness about the victims that were also being gendered, right? It wasn't just black men and boys that were victims of police violence, it was also black women and girls. And so Sandra Bland's death happens 2 months after this report comes out in July, where she was pulled over for a failure to turn a traffic light signal and was pinned by the police officer who arrested her and taken to jail. 2 days later, she's found dead in her jail cell. So her family and friends think that there's foul play. The police say that it was suicide. But so what comes out is this use of Sandra Bland as an exemplar for police violence against black women. And so that's what we're kind of interested in, is how this story of Sandra Bland's death is being transmediated on Twitter and on Facebook. And so we use the African American Policy Forum's blueprint to kind of guide us in what the message of police violence against black women should be, right? And so what we find is that on Facebook, users were more likely to derail against this original message that there is police violence against black women and girls. And one of the ways that we see that is, for example, a user on Facebook talks about how Bland had previous attempts to suicide. It's like, yes, although that may have been a part of her life story, may or may not have been, that's not the story that we need to tell right now, right? The example that we need to talk about is the fact that black women are also victims of police violence and that this is a systemic issue. So that's how we found that Facebook was being used, and Twitter was more being used as a way to promote this message. How do we talk about like actually saying her name? Hashtag Sandra Bland, this is what happened. Her death was a result of police violence. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we talked about. This is also my first publication, and so it's like been a really amazing opportunity to be a part of. And it's also, that was my first semester at Berkeley getting into research. This was like the original project that I did with Dr. Norris was my first research project. So it's like that was my first real exposure. It becomes my first publication, and now I'm also a PhD student, so that's really cool. Thank you.
We're going to open it up in just a second for questions, comments, conversation. But before we do that, I wanted to make a plug for the Color of New Media Working Group, which is, this is our first publication, but the group has been meeting, I think, for about 6 years now. We are supported by the Berkeley Center for New Media and the Center for Race and Gender. We meet monthly in the BCNM Commons, which is in Moffett right over there, if you don't know it. If you're not already on our email list, please come tell us. We'll put you on the email list to make sure that you're invited. We have really great kind of open conversations. I think one of the things that I have found so generative about the Color of New Media Working Group is that it's our approach has been to be in the mix of the present. Like, what are the really present day concerns and issues that are alive in the field of new media, online, in popular culture, on TV, in film, and what can us coming together and just kind of talking it out, you know, what can come out of that? Sometimes it's long, big, multi-year projects like a co-edited book project. Sometimes it's honors theses, some theses, there's a plural that I'm stumbling on. Sometimes it's dissertation chapters, sometimes it's shop talks. So it's a really open space, and really, we really invite you to come participate in the Color of New Media Working Group. So, and our next meeting is October 7th, so from 1 to 2. Let's put that on our calendars. So, without further ado, let's open it up for questions and comments and a little conversation. And let me invite Gail up here to join me as well.
But also for everybody. I mean, questions for everybody.
Questions for everybody.
Or just drinking. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just curious about the process that you engaged in, because I think that you obviously gave voice to very important ideas, and I also am aware that this is not a small undertaking, and so I'm just interested in what does it take to create a volume such as this?
Yeah, you know, one thing that our editor asked right as soon as this book went to press is, what's the next one? Going to be about, what's the next Color of New Media project? And Keith and I looked at each other and we're like, no, no, we can't have that conversation yet. We're not ready for that. But like now, I feel like today I feel a little differently. I don't know. I feel so energized and inspired by seeing how far the scholarship has come and where it has gone and where it's going. I think that what we found was maybe graduate school doesn't teach its graduate students 100% of what they need to know about what it takes to write a published piece of scholarship, but that actually mentorship can do that. You know, mentorship and advising can do what like the institution can't do or isn't doing. I don't know, you know, authors. You know what's so great about Nalia too is that she's not our advisee or mentee, she is Amina's.
Yeah.
She is my student in essence, you know? So like what's incredible about identity, #identity, is that it was able to not just platform the kind of mentorship that we could do with our authors who are our graduate students and the Color of New Media members, but it could platform one of the members' mentorship of an undergraduate. And Amina was able to help mentor Nalia into graduate school also. So, you know, we've already started like building a pipeline for the academy and stuff, and like giving them CV things, you know. So I think that's been great, but it's also been long and hard to kind of, I've been feeling it as like backfilling. I mean, then we're part of the institution, so it's like, we blame ourselves too, you know, like why don't graduate programs, why don't they give enough of this structure to get graduate student writing to that publishable place or whatever, but we've been happy to devote that time to getting this into the shape that it needed to be, and I couldn't be happier today. What do you think?
Yeah, totally. No, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, one of the things that, sort of building on that comment is, I've been teaching this class about Stuart Hall. This is the second time I'm teaching it this year, and Hall writes a lot about what cultural studies was like in Birmingham in the 70s, where so much of the work was collaborative work towards publication. And it's interesting to sit in graduate seminars where that's super rare.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a contrasting model. And it sort of invites us to think about the changes over time in academic institutions and the kinds of training and labor that go into graduate work. And then I look at #identity, which is kind of that collaborative project, right? That here's a working group that's sitting together for a couple of years trying to suss out what hashtags are doing, and taking, taking a committed kind of approach to working together to sussing it all out, and not having necessarily a singular theory that holds the book together. We talked about that for a little while, whether we wanted that, and actually I think one of the strengths and interesting dimensions of the book is how varied the approaches are, right? The approaches of our authors really shift from object to object, from time period, from media, from location, and being able to hold that variation in a single, between two covers was really important for us.
Yeah, I just want to commend you because I know that an edited volume such as this is not necessarily leading to, do you know what I mean? It's not like a published article under your name. And it breaks so many barriers in terms of like opening up the space. And I know from the D-Lab perspective that I see that many of our graduate students are children of doctors and professors, and many of our graduate students are not. And so you're really creating this transparency where you're making it really clear that what the process is. And so there's so many things that you're achieving with this volume, so thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Our students opt in to the group and the group opts in to the students. And I think that is so important, that reciprocity, that wanting to be together. So many advisor-advisee relationships, unfortunately, are like assigned or something. So to not have it be imposed upon them, but to have them, they don't get any like prize for coming to meetings in their spare time, and we don't get any prizes for leading them. But it's like we all get what we get out of it, and I think that has been, this network has been the greatest network I've made at Berkeley. No disrespect to all the other networks, but I feel like this has been the thing. This has been, my Birmingham school, my Frankfurt school, my Starship Enterprise, like this has been that thing that I feel like it's amazing how we didn't need any money to do it, and we didn't ask for anyone's permission, and and it ends up being the best thing. Like, I think that's weird, but yeah.
Hi. I just wanted to open a discussion topic that you raised earlier, Keith, when we were talking about how this book is, how you're thinking about this book post-2016, since you said it started before the election. And also invite any of the other authors to talk about how the election and watching public policy happen on Twitter has affected the way that you're thinking about your work.
Do you want to click on the Colorado, just so that they, in case they.
Oh, I think they're.
Oh, they're.
Oh, they left us with a slide.
They're here.
Just saying.
Good. So there's a question about how we're thinking about this project post 2016, and what it means to think about Twitter and social media in a moment now that's in some ways prefigured in some of the work that we did in the book, and in other ways kind of surprising. And it's kind of open to all the authors.
This is something that Arturo can speak to more, something that just occurred actually last Friday. But I think a good reminder is that I turned in my first draft of this chapter to Gail in 2013. So, this was like stuff that was, 2000, that was what, 6 years ago, and Twitter had a different type of presence, I think, in the social media context than it does now. I think that there's a slight shift, especially with younger people. We did a workshop on Monday where we had a high schooler who said, "What is Twitter and who uses Twitter?" And I thought she was kidding, but she wasn't kidding. She doesn't use Twitter. We use this Snapchat and TikTok, right? And so one of the things that we're learning is that it's not necessarily that, oh, now this is irrelevant, right, or that somehow that it's past its time, but rather that we still have some lessons in terms of that we learn from doing this work. Then now we have to find ways of for lack of a better word, translating to new platforms that are now being used by young people, by younger people than us, I suppose. And that white people have me, younger than me. And that in our case, that this was really an engagement and an exploration of how learning can leverage everyday cultural practices. And if so, then that means I have to keep up with the everyday cultural digital practices of young people as well.
Precisely, I think that we have to trust in people. We have to make sure that we're looking at the agentic practices that people are already engaged in their everyday lives. And one of the interesting things that I see across all of the chapters is that Twitter is being appropriated in all these fascinating ways. And that's one of the powerful things about how social media gets appropriated that I've seen in my own work, is that folks are always trying to find new places to engage in resistant practices. And I think that's what we're seeing there, and that's the main lesson that I'm taking away as I engage and work with students here at Boulder.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, thank you.
Other authors?
Yeah, Lyndsey's in the back.
Yeah,
Hi, I'm Renée. I just wanted to make one note. I feel the pain as far as the Twitter students not using it. My students make me feel old on a daily basis. Like how I'm cataloging my life is when I say something and they don't. They give me the dead eyes. But I feel like, and my chapter looked at specifically actually post-feminist participation online. So I was dealing with gender rather than race or sexuality. But one thing I actually am noticing that's interesting and that has become such an issue and a relevant topic within feminism specifically is the intergenerational dynamic and the division between generations. And it's interesting to see how that actually translates to a digital divide in the sense that there are different audiences are going to different platforms. So the conversation that we're wanting to have, or this sort of open forum that we're hoping will bring people together of different generations to have these conversations, isn't happening specifically because women have been older than, say, myself, and I'm not gonna say how old I am, maybe in the Facebook groups that I study. And then there's the groups of women that I look at who are maybe in sort of my bubble, who are really still on Twitter, still using that. And then there are my students and younger, and who knows what the hell they're using, because I can't keep up with it on a daily basis. But to have a conversation where we're talking about the same things actually might be happening across different platforms. And so what might have to happen next is an evaluation of what the platforms offer to these different groups. And obviously, clearly, there is, the idea that like once your mom starts using a certain platform, it's no longer cool, we're going to move on. But also, what's being facilitated, and then how and where can we get this conversation to happen amongst potential allies in whatever space or whatever issue is being discussed.
Hi, I'm not an author. I copyrighted the book. And in response, yes, hi, I know everything about all of you.
Amazing copy. Nick is why the book looks as great as it does.
Yeah. Thank you. Woo! Copy editor.
Yeah.
I just wanted to respond to what you were saying. Something that also has come out of BCNM was oh my God, not Lyndsey.
That would be me.
Renée Pastel, not Renée. Jesus, I'm sorry. My brain just has been Jen Schrade's revolution that wasn't about how digital platforms favor conservatives.
You mean Berkeley alum, one of my former students, now a professor in Paris.
And I just think that's a really important part of the conversation that you're having and that we're having here. That's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And Jen found that Jen researched both right-leaning and left-leaning political organizations in North Carolina, and all of them were online. Some of them organized by telephone. Not all of them even were speaking in the same terminology about what the issues even were. There was so much difference, so much more difference that Jen was able to surface through her data collection than people in the academy, I think, tend to suspect. I also want to say Miyoko Conley and Marcelo Garza Montalvo and some of the authors whom you already met, Kylie too, participated in 2 Color of New Media meetings that were really important and are transcribed in a kind of edited transcription in the book. And one of them happened basically 2 weeks after Trump's inauguration. And that chapter is called The Color of New Media Enters Trumplandia. And the shock and horror in the transcription, I think, is so important. It's for me, it's a really important part of the historical record now. And then the second chapter is even more incendiary. It's called The Color of New Media and Free Speech Week at UC Berkeley. And it's about that week, that notorious week that I hope we all remember when Milo Yiannopoulos and many other asshats were invited to campus to speak here. And those 2 meetings that we had were so fulsome and rich and generative, and also full of just complaint and legitimate complaint and referring to earlier moments in history and comparing to other movements in the world. And we almost didn't get those in there because the press said these are hot takes, it's so emotional, And I asked a couple mentors about that, and they all said historical record. And in the end, the press's editorial board also used that phrase. They also, and I didn't tell them that. I didn't defend it on the grounds this is history. But they came back and they said we were on the fence about it. There was a lot of discussion about those 2 transcription chapters, but we decided to allow them both in because they're part of the historical record. So those are not essays that had to go through the revision process 10 million times. You know, those were just people coming to meetings, and people coming to meetings and talking about these issues is the substance of the color of new media. So I'm so glad those got in, because like in a way, at least those 2 chapters really represent what we do on the page, you know, in fact. So I'm so glad. Thank you all so much for participating in those meetings, and you're a part of this book too. I just wanted to flag that.
Well, thank you all so much again for coming and celebrating. Let's continue celebrating with some wine and some food and some more conversation.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you. It's great seeing you.
Bye, we miss you.